The news story begins in the emperor's palace, where he is holding a document and saying, "Document of surrender of the Duchy of Saydat." Expanding the territory outside the Halleck iron mine had been a dream that the king had been unable to achieve. And here he praised the Marquis and said to him, "Well done, Marquis." Then with a smile he said to him, "It was enjoyable to think about what could be offered to you as a reward." And here the Marquis was shocked when the emperor said to him, "Isn't your son the one who missed out on marriage because of the war?" Then he looked at him tensely as the emperor said, "The royal family must also take responsibility as your successor this year." And here the Marquis was looking at his son as he said his son's name, Eric. And here his son replied and said, "I have turned 24 this year, Your Majesty." And the emperor looked at him and said, "The age is appropriate. All right, I will give you my dear sister, who happens to be of marriageable age already." And here the Marquis looked at him in tension and said, "The mysterious princess whom no one has ever seen before, isn't she already dead?" Then he started saying to himself in tension, "Why would they give up such a princess?" At the same time, the emperor gestured to the maids and asked them, saying, "This must be the first time someone from outside has seen the princess." And here, when the maids opened the door, the princess entered. And here the guards looked at her in tension as the emperor said, "Princess of the kingdom of Escalier, my younger sister, whom I cherish more than anyone else, Misa de Escalin." But she was in a difficult state. And here Eric looked at her in shock. And here the emperor looked at her and said with a smile, "The princess is very shy. Misa, come here." But she suddenly fell to the ground, and here her brother, the emperor, laughed and said, "The princess is a little ill, so please understand." Then he said to her, "Misa, get up." And here the Marquis was in shock, but he couldn't help but say, "It is a great honor for the family to welcome the noble princess." And at the same time he was saying to himself, "So this is the princess." Then Eric said, "I will try not to offend His Majesty and the princess." And here the emperor said with a smile, "Yes, since she is your future wife, you should get closer to her." And Eric did so and approached her, then bowed, looking at her and taking her hands. He was about to kiss her when she suddenly pushed him away, shocking Eric. At the same time, Misa was looking at him with fear and tension. So the emperor laughed and said, "Misa, you shouldn't do that to the person who will be your husband. Come here." And Misa went to him. She sat on the ground next to him, and the emperor put his hands on her head like a pet and said, "The princess was a little rude. You need to apologize, Misa." And here Misa tried, but she couldn't speak. And here Eric was in shock at her state. And here the scene changes to the Marquis sitting in the carriage with his wife. And he was feeling angry and saying, "It was a long war, and Clader was undoubtedly the main protagonist of victory in this war." But the king didn't like that. Maybe that's why he arranged this marriage, the price of the loyalty we have shown so far. And here the scene changes to them sitting at the table, and one of them says in anger about the princess, "She's just a stupid girl." At the same time, Eric was saying to himself, "An order from the king cannot be refused. The wedding has already become inevitable, even if it is a loveless marriage. As the eldest heir of the Clader family, I just need to do what I have to do and fulfill my duty to the Crispin family, and this is Eric's cousin, Emberic Clader." And here the Marquis said in anger, "Are you asking that? Don't you know? Of course he's disappeared. It seems like this tyrant has gone mad and doesn't know what to do anymore. Why aren't you even angry, Talisa?" And here Talisa, the Marquis's wife, opened a bottle of wine and poured it in silence. Then she remembered when she was sitting with the princess's maids and said in anger, "What?" And one of the princess's maids told her what the emperor had said, which was, "He said that the princess should not use the bedroom alone." And Talisa said, "As you can see, there is a central corridor connecting the bedrooms." And the maid said, "Lady Clader, what if the princess is not well?" "My lady, it will be a big problem if the princess faints at night." And the other maid said, "And that would really anger the king." And when she heard that, she agreed and said, "Okay, I'll put some servants on." And here the maid screamed and said, "Oh my God, servants! Are you thinking of entrusting the princess's body to a servant or something like that? That's right, my lady. I'm sure His Majesty the King will be furious." Talisa looked at them in anger, in other words. And in anger, she said, "Are they asking us to personally care for the princess? How dare they do that to the heir of Clader?" And here we come back to reality. Eric is looking at her as she drinks the wine, and he began to say to himself, "It was a night full of anger and pain, but it was no different from my ordinary life. And finally, this day has come. A brave knight returned victorious from the war and married a noble princess, and the crowd that was tired of war smiled happily. No wonder they were so excited. To those who do not know the circumstances, it will look like a fairy tale." And here one of the guests said, "The princess has appeared." And the other one said to him, "What do you think she was like when she was little?" And here she couldn't speak and was shocked at the arrival of the Marquis with his wife, so she whispered and said to him, "Be quiet. The Marquis is here." And suddenly one of the guards stopped the Marquis and whispered, saying to him, "His Majesty the King cannot attend the wedding." And here the Marquis said angrily, "What in the hell?" And the guard continued and said, "And fortunately the bride, the princess, arrived safely." And here the Marquis clenched his fists in anger and said to himself, "Is he planning to make a fool of us until the end?" Then he left in anger. And here the priest said to start the ceremony, "All guests, please sit down. And we ask the groom to take his place on the podium." And Eric did so. And then the door opened, and the servants entered with the princess. And here the people present began to whisper silently and say, "Oh my God, what's going on? She looks like she's drunk. She can't even walk properly." And here Eric was standing on the podium waiting for the bride. And here the priest began the wedding ceremony, saying, "The groom, Eric Clader, and the bride, Missa de Escalin, I declare officially before everyone that you have become husband and wife for the rest of your lives." Kiss of the oath. And here Eric kissed her. And at night, the servant said to Eric after he got ready and was on his way to the princess, "When celebrating the first night, you must never hurt the princess." And the other maid, "We will visit you tomorrow morning to get proof that the wedding night has been consummated." And here Eric said to them, "All right." But when Eric entered the bedroom, he found Missa tied to the bed, and he was in shock. And here he approached her and took off the robe, saying, "Princess," but he was shocked when he found 2 empty bottles. He said to himself, "Medicine bottle, sedative. This amount would be enough to calm a horse. Using sedatives on a person on the verge of death? They don't even do that to prisoners from enemy countries. Who dares to do something shameful like this?" And here he gritted his teeth in anger and continued, saying to himself, "And it is clear that this is impossible without the king's order." Then he said, "This is unbelievable." And he began to untie the straps, saying, "I think you're feeling cold, so I'm going to untie your restraints now. Your body temperature has dropped a lot too." Then he looked at her bruise and said to her, "Are you okay?" And at the same time he said to himself, "She can't be okay. She must be in pain. Her wrists are still tied. I'll free your wrists too." And he did just that. And here he took her hands and looked at her red fingertips, saying, "Her fingertips are red, as if they were tied up for a long time. If you leave things like this, there will be big problems." Then he got up and said to himself, "It seems that this is the only way." So he approached her and said, "Princess, I will lie down under your blanket." And he did so. And he began to look at her, saying, "Don't be afraid." Then he lay down next to her and said, "My name is Eric, and I am from the Clader family. I am 24 years old, and I have no siblings. I had a younger sister, but I lost her in an accident when I was young. All this time, because of the war, I have been living on the border. My princess, you married me today." And here he looked at her in silence, and he began to say to himself, "To what extent can you understand? However, it would be wise to inform her of the current situation. Then he took her hands and said to her, "Winter is cold on the border, and since frostbite starts from the extremities, the most important thing is to ensure blood flow to the extremities of the body." But suddenly he noticed that Missa had fallen asleep, and here he got up and said to himself, "I think she's feeling better because her skin color has returned to normal. She'll feel better after sleeping." And he left the bed, continuing to say to himself, "Now, I need to create proof of the first wedding night. Where can I get the right thing?" And the next day, Eric went with the evidence to the maids who said to him, "Are you awake already?" And Eric, "Here's proof of completion." And here the maid took it and said to the other, "I'll give it to the priest." And when one of them left, she said, "So we'll dress the princess right away." And she was about to open the door when Eric stopped her and said, "Wait a minute. The princess hasn't woken up yet, so you can do that later." And the maid, "All right." And she left with the other maid, one of whom said to the other, "Let's get some rest." And when they left, Eric entered the room and noticed that Missa was eating the robe. And here he said to her, "Princess, this is not for eating." And here he turned to the food and said to her, "It seems you're hungry. Wait a minute, please." And he went and took one and said, "Princess, what do you think of this?" And here she left the robe and took it from him, and Eric watched her eat it. And here he smiled and said to her, "I'm glad you like it." And here the scene changes to Eric's return to his family's palace. And here he said, "I brought the princess with me, and the marquis, all right." And he was saying to himself at the same time, "How did it end up like this?" Then he turned to the other side and said, "You're probably tired, so get some rest first." But suddenly the princess, who had the mind of a child, started climbing the statue, and the maids shouted, saying, "Princess, this is dangerous. Come down now, princess. You can't climb up there." And here Eric picked her up, and what happened angered the marquis, while Eric looked on in silence. And the maid, "The princess must be tired, so let's take her to rest." But Eric said to her, "It's okay. You must both be tired from the journey, so take out your belongings and rest." And the maid, "All right." Then she began to whisper to the other, smiling and saying to the other, "So we'll leave now." And here Eric said, "Head butler, the princess has become another member of our family as of today. Since she is not feeling well, be careful when taking care of her." And the head butler, "Yes, we will take care of it, so there is no need to worry." Then they left, while his mother looked at him in silence. And the scene changes to lunchtime as they sit at the table. And here Eric said to the maid, "I'll take care of my wife's dinner, so you can rest now." And the maid, "All right. The princess has many accidents, especially when eating." And here he asked her and said, "Is there any food that my wife likes or dislikes?" And the maid, "No, she eats everything normally." And here Eric tried to feed the princess, saying to her, "Princess, would you like to try?" And indeed, the princess ate, and she began to chew the food, until suddenly she spat the food in Eric's face. Then she got angry and grabbed the food and poured it on him, and Eric, in tension, said to her, "Princess, calm down now." Then he held her and said, "Didn't you like the food?" While her maids were laughing. Eric looked at them and said, "It seems that my wife has gotten dirty and needs to be washed." So they stopped laughing and said, "All right." And when they took her away, Eric returned and sat down. But what happened angered the marquise, so he turned to his wife and spoke to her in gestures so that the servants would not understand what he was saying. He was saying to her, "Is it necessary to keep her alive?" And here he means the princess. But his wife smiled. Then she also spoke to him by reference, and she says, "If you kill her, we're going to die."